Good afternoon and welcome, class of 2023 and families. My name is Tasneem Khokha, and I am a graduate of the college and the law school and president of the university's Alumni Board. It is my great privilege today to welcome you both to an institution that is so very dear to me and also to our global alumni community, of which you are now members. My college experience began somewhat inauspiciously. There were a few academic near misses, including during my first quarter biology class, when I had to call my brother, then a medical student, to save me and my transcript from what would have been the worst grade I had seen since third grade spelling. There were also the growing pains of balancing work in the classroom with countless student activities, a few really good parties, and of course naps, lots and lots of naps. But eventually I found my groove, and UChicago started to feel like home. This place will undoubtedly stretch you in many ways, but hang in there, you'll find your groove too. I could enumerate dozens of examples of how UChicago shaped me and my life in profound ways, and yet because the organist is going to start playing in exactly 7 minutes, I'll limit myself to 3. First and foremost, UChicago is where I truly discovered the joy of cultivating a life of the mind. In fact, it was in these very pews during the Aims of Education address where I heard Professor Richard Schrader declare that many on campus believe that the brain is an erogenous zone. Indeed, it was here that I fully embraced the joys of copious reading, intense study, and immersing myself in learning. I was a Regenstein girl, and the Reg became my second home for most of my 4 years at the college. I thought I had worked hard before then, but I had never studied like that before. Late nights at the Reg notwithstanding, the most important lesson about the life of the mind I learned here is the great joy of learning with and from others. This campus, its classrooms, its dining halls, its coffee shops, this is where I learned the value of spirited and respectful debate, the power of exchanging ideas, and the potential in creating knowledge and understanding collectively. You see, there are plenty of very smart people in the world, and yet the most impactful ideas and actions are born from collaboration and co-creation. At UChicago, I hope you'll learn, as I did, how to respect and value the perspective of others, even when you don't agree with them, and how to use those differing perspectives to more richly inform your own thoughts, opinions, and beliefs. The second great lesson UChicago taught me was about leadership. There are many who think that leadership is about authority and power. You need only to open a history book or newspaper to see innumerable examples of this point of view in action. But instead, my UChicago experience taught me that leadership is about generosity and service to others. In my 3rd and 4th years in the college, I was an RA in campus residence hall, where 80 of my peers looked to me to provide everything from advice on choosing classes to a bottomless pot of coffee to fuel late nights of studying. I had the joy of sharing with my fellow residents when they came home to celebrate their successes, a hard-earned grade on a paper, or a hard-fought win on the intramural football field. And yet some of the most important moments I shared with my fellow residents were when we faced the inevitable growing pains of college and adulthood. It was in those moments when we tested our values and defined the outlines of our character. It was that kind of growing up that makes the college such a transformative experience. And it was in those experiences that I discovered the great joy of serving others and the positive impact I could have as a leader who led from a place of humility and generosity. That lesson served me well on campus, and it has continued to serve me well since I left, both in business and in my personal and volunteer endeavors. I find that my ability to get things done with and through others depends more on showing empathy and building camaraderie than on upholding high standards or exhibiting dogged determination. Finally, my UChicago experience taught me that the most valuable asset I could ever possess is my relationships with others. The relationships I built here have opened countless doors to me, professionally and personally. Where else would I have gotten to know a young state senator who would become president? In fact, I can trace every step in my 20-year career in law and consulting back to UChicago in one way or another. But more importantly, my relationships with fellow students, faculty, staff, and alumni have shaped my character and my life in immeasurable ways. I've looked to my UChicago community to celebrate with me in moments of joy, like when I sold my business, and to stand with me in moments of sadness, like when my father passed away. Those in my UChicago community have influenced my career path, teaching me how to be a better executive, and they've also taught me how to be a better daughter, sister, and friend. I hope that your UChicago experience will teach you important lessons too, whether they are about learning, leadership, and relationships like mine, or about vastly different things. I hope that these lessons will inform your character, your aspirations, and your purpose in positive ways, and that by being part of this great institution, it will leave an indelible mark on you and your path. Before I conclude my remarks, on behalf of the Alumni Board and the community of 170,000 UChicago alumni we represent, I want to encourage you to consider yourselves, from this very moment, part of our global alumni community. And I invite you to actively participate in our community. You'll have countless opportunities on and off campus to connect with fellow alumni, including homecoming, alumni weekend, Metcalf internships, and career treks. I encourage you to seek out alumni connections for academic advice, career opportunities, and mentoring. I've seen the incredible value in building connections among our alumni in almost every aspect of my life, and I hope you will too. So now, before the music ushers me off, I'll bid you one last word of welcome and pass the baton to Vice President for Enrollment and Dean of Admissions, Jim Nondorf.
Welcome, students and families. I did tell you that it would all work out, and here you are. Congratulations, and get excited for the next 4 years. Yeah, all right. So, you are amazing. The most impressive, brilliant, diverse, and quite honestly, probably the nicest class I have admitted in my 10 years as Dean of Admissions. Yeah, all right. I know I shouldn't say it, but you're probably the best class ever, hands down. Now, sorry, upperclassmen. Now, given your past accomplishments and future aspirations, I'm certain you will make incredible contributions to our campus and very soon to the world. UChicago is also an incredible place. Take pride in your school. Know how fortunate you are to be at UChicago. Embrace your wonderful classmates, maybe a few literally if things go well, and of course, make the most of your time at the world's best university. President Zimmer, as Dean of Admissions and Aid, I am pleased and very proud to formally present to you, Dean Boyer, and the faculty, the class of 2023.
Well, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you, the University of Chicago College class of 2023, and our new transfer students to the University of Chicago. And it's likewise a pleasure to welcome those parents of our new students who are with us today, watching via live stream from campus locations or from around the world, for you are also joining the University of Chicago community. The University of Chicago is a distinctive institution with a history of remarkable achievement and a particular view of and commitment to education and research. Most of us who have spent many years here believe there is no place that is more exciting, more challenging, or more enriching, and no university that plays a more important role in the history and landscape of American higher education, or indeed higher education worldwide. I'd like to say a few words about why this is and what this will mean for your experience here as students in the college. And I would also like to say a few words about why we believe that you, who are about to enter the college, are just the right students to be here and the important role that you will play in this community. The University of Chicago is an institution driven from its inception by an idea an idea that one could create and continuously renew a university focused on rigorous, intense inquiry and analysis. The university, through its work every day, expresses the view that clarity derives from the clash of ideas and the willingness to accept answers only when they meet the tests of argument. We believe that the best education and the most empowering education takes place in the environment of constant challenge implicit in this culture of rigorous inquiry, and that this culture is responsible for producing ideas of power and importance to humankind. This focus on rigorous inquiry has defined the University of Chicago and its research and its education at all levels since its beginning, and it continues to do so today. Now, what does this culture of inquiry really mean? It's useful to illustrate with an example. So as the word inquiry itself implies, let's begin with a question. Namely, what are you doing when you're engaged in a discussion? What is the point of argument? Now, if you're like many people, the purpose is to convince the other person that they have it all wrong and that you have it all right. And we've all, at one time or another, engaged in such argument. However, for our work at the university, that is not really the point of a discussion or argument. That point is rather to take the issue in question and explore arguments from all perspectives. Which arguments are valid under what circumstances? Which stand scrutiny? What are their power and what are their limitations? How do they relate? How they comport with various data and so on. The goal is greater clarity about arguments from all perspectives on the issue. Embedded in this approach is the understanding that most often all arguments do not point in the same direction, and an argument's power and limitations must be understood simultaneously. Problems are complex. There are systemic interactions. Single actions have both benefits and undesirable consequences. Seemingly simple assertions can have complex implications. Arguments apply with more power in some circumstances and are more limited in others. New data can always emerge and must be sought. The more one argues and discusses, the more data that are brought to bear, related questions raised and analyzed, and perspectives incorporated into the analysis, then the fabric of understanding becomes richer and the approach to the problem becomes more nuanced. In our culture of inquiry, understanding becomes complex, expandable, and fluid rather than simple and rigid. I want to emphasize that this approach is not at all equivalent to saying that all arguments have merit. In fact, quite the contrary. This approach asserts that all arguments, no matter how comfortable they may be to you, require scrutiny, and quite explicitly recognizes the difficulty of establishing merit in arguments. Another feature of the intellectual environment at Chicago is that problems are taken on their own terms. So by this, I mean that many problems do not present themselves neatly along the lines of traditional and important academic disciplines. This is not to devalue the disciplines. On the contrary, the disciplines provide important and developed modes of inquiry that have great explanatory power. However, they also have limitations. And for many important questions, one must understand and bring to bear the depth of perspective of several disciplines. This multidisciplinary engagement and intellectual porosity are other key aspects of the University of Chicago that emanate directly from the integrity of our approach to inquiry. Intellectual porosity also has a significant impact on what it feels like every day to be a member of the University of Chicago community. As a mathematics faculty member for many years, I was always aware of being part of a larger institution with a commitment to rigorous inquiry and a corresponding sense of its own mission. The University of Chicago never feels like an intellectual holding company for disparate disciplines. It has a sense of wholeness and unity of purpose that is very distinctive. The core curriculum, a source of innovation in higher education whose value continues to resonate, is one realization of this unity of purpose. And I'm confident that you will come to share this sense of the university. In order for you to most benefit from and best contribute to this environment, you must develop the skills and the approach of holding competing perspectives in your mind simultaneously, listening to arguments of others, and both understanding and challenging them. And at the same time, you must challenge your own assumptions. And this is often the hardest part, while ultimately still forging your own synthesis. It is a level of thought and analysis that leaves the simple who is right and who is wrong far behind. Here at the University of Chicago, you will find that an argument must stand on its own and that it will not hold up to scrutiny simply because it is common, popular, or fashionable. And as you will discover, this is a community that finds intense, rigorous engagement tremendously exciting, enjoyable, challenging, empowering, and gratifying, and with a great sense of community and commonality around this distinctive experience. Entering this community and meeting so many new people and engaging new challenges as you now are is exciting, but can also be sometimes a bit intimidating. You will find yourself needing to take some risks, engaging in conversation and debate, and being open-minded to what others are saying. You'll learn a great deal from your early engagements, from your fellow students, and from the faculty, and you will likewise contribute a great deal. It may not all come together immediately or easily, but this exploration and experimentation is part of the learning process, and you will soon find your footing and discover that you can, in fact, do this extremely well. I want to return to one word I just used, namely empowering, and briefly address another question. Why exactly is education in the University of Chicago environment so empowering, as so many of our students, ultimately turned alumni, have found for generations? To begin to answer this, let's look a bit at the difference between action and analysis. Action has an either-or quality. Taking action can lead to intended benefits and the desired end, but sometimes to undesirable consequences as well. What would be the best approach to taking such action? With the simple and comfortable belief that one is right and it is all for the best? Or with the habits of mind to realize that in many cases, all the arguments for a particular action are not on one side, and that one can understand and anticipate the full context and consequences of an act, the downside as well as the upside. So what the analytic culture of inquiry at the University of Chicago provides is a lifelong set of skills and approach to the world that eschews simplicity and comfort in favor of analysis, inquiry, and the recognition of complexity. It empowers appropriate action because it strives to understand its full implications. In fostering the habit of questioning, it simultaneously fosters imagination and creativity of action. It is this approach that has empowered so many of our students over the years and provided the environment for our faculty research. It is what has empowered our faculty and alumni to challenge conventional wisdom, define new disciplines, make imaginative and creative contributions to almost every domain of human endeavor, assume leadership positions throughout the world, and in fact, change the world. And it will do this for you as well. Diversity has a very particular role at the University of Chicago. The nature of questions being asked and perspectives being expressed are often a function of the experience and outlook of those participating. Diversity for the University of Chicago is therefore particularly germane to our core mission. So we must ensure that our scholarly and education community is comprised of a rich mix of individuals who, through their own distinctive viewpoints, contribute to the intellectually challenging culture of inquiry of the university. Our history reflects this openness. The university has, unlike many of our peer institutions, always been open to women as well as men. The first doctorate awarded by this institution was from a scholar to a scholar from Japan. The first doctorate earned by a Black woman in the United States was awarded in 1921 at the University of Chicago. We were among the first major non-historically Black universities to tenure a Black faculty member. Contributions by Asian American scholars in the 1920s were essential to the university's landmark research in sociology. At a time when other elite institutions systematically discriminated against Jews, the University of Chicago refused to set quotas. We have long been a magnet for students from Mexico and South America. Our Odyssey and No Barriers programs and other financial aid programs are designed to ensure that we remain accessible and attractive to outstanding talented students from low and moderate income families, and that these students have the capacity to take full advantage of their time at the University of Chicago. From our earliest days, we have been committed to deep and active engagement with scholars, students, and visitors from around the world. Our many international programs and global centers in Delhi, Beijing, Hong Kong, London, and Paris create vital opportunities for learning, research, collaboration, and partnerships. International students and faculty have long been an important part of our community, and we welcome the enormous talent that they bring and the distinct perspectives and knowledge that their backgrounds bring to discourse at the University of Chicago. We value immigration as a critical pipeline of talent and ideas, essential to fulfilling our highest aspirations in research, education, and impact, and for the talent and energy that immigrants bring to this country. This commitment extends to those members of our community who may be undocumented or protected under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and accordingly, all DACA students receive the same treatment under all of these programs as domestic students. Throughout its history, the university has acted on the belief that the capacity to contribute was not limited to some specific groups, and very importantly, in addition, that the richness of the community directly contributed to the richness of the intellectual environment. We emphasize this every day, and we are unwavering in this commitment. Another key part of this history is the singular role that the University of Chicago has had in maintaining open inquiry, supporting free expression, and ensuring that those in our community are free to express and to hear ideas, even if others find them uncomfortable or even objectionable. As it has been for over a century, the University of Chicago today remains the national leader among universities and colleges in articulating the importance of open inquiry and free expression to the very quality of education. The intellectual challenge intrinsic to the most empowering education for you and for every student at the university demands an environment of free expression and open discourse. And as a member of the University of Chicago community, it will be your responsibility to take part in and preserve this culture of openness and free expression. The university that you are entering today has been built by many persons over more than a century. Every generation and thousands of individuals have made contributions to its strength, culture, achievements, and vitality. Each of us at the university today, faculty, students, administrators, and staff, are the beneficiaries of those who came before us, who gave to the university through their work, their commitment, their financial contributions, and their advocacy. It is this legacy that we all inherit together, and it is this legacy on which we all build together. You will contribute to this legacy through your own work in the college. When you reassemble in 4 years' time to celebrate the completion of your studies at Senior Class Day, and through your continued engagement with the university after you graduate. You are becoming part of the continuum of the history of this institution. So this is something about the university, and now what about you, our students entering the college this fall? You've come from all over the world with a wide variety of backgrounds, interests, and ambitions. But most importantly, you have convinced us that you are exactly the right students who can most contribute to and most benefit from the culture I have described. You've convinced us by the work you have done, the presentation you have made of your abilities, interests, and outlook, the recommendations of those who know you, and your demonstrated commitment that you will be wonderful and full members of the University of Chicago community and all that it entails. And it is for all these reasons that the University of Chicago and all it represents has chosen to invest in you. The university community that you join is comprised of your fellow students in the college and beyond the college, the university's faculty, administrator, and staff, our trustees, alumni, and committed friends, our students and alumni parents, and those who have been here before as faculty and administrators. And it will soon include those who will come after you. It is a community of enormous energy, excitement, challenge, and enjoyment in ongoing mutual learning. While you are, of course, focused on the next 4 years, you're entering a community that you'll be part of for many, many years to come. Before closing, I want to say a few words to the parents who are here or listening. Having been through this myself 3 times, I know that sending one's children off to college is not a simple act. It is exciting, although a bit anxiety-provoking. It is an act of significant financial commitment. It is also an act of trust. Trust in your children that they will take advantage of the extraordinary opportunities that college affords them. Trust in yourselves that you have done your job to this point as parents and can watch and hopefully enjoy your children's growth in this next phase of life. And of course, trust in the institution that they attend. You are entrusting us at the University of Chicago with the education of your children, now our students. And I know that for most of you, there is nothing more important. And likewise for us at the University of Chicago, there is nothing more important. So to new students and parents alike, welcome to the University of Chicago. It is for all the reasons I have described a university like no other, where you will have an education like no other. You are now part of this extraordinary and distinctive community with its remarkable legacy and its remarkable future. This will be a great adventure. Enjoy it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the people in front of me, and good afternoon to the people in back of me. And good afternoon to the parents listening in Harper Quadrangles and in other rooms on the quadrangles. My name is John Boyer. Sometimes of the day, I'm a professor of modern European history, but I'm speaking to you today as Dean of the College. to welcome the class of 2023 to the University of Chicago. I'd like to speak with you about this college and this university, about the world in which we find ourselves, and about the city to which you have come to live. You are starting college at a special university, a university which is a distinguished privately endowed institution, but one which also claims and acknowledges serious public responsibilities, not the least of which is to afford young women and men of ambition the opportunity to enrich by love of learning their own lives and the lives of others. Colleges play a powerful role in American life. They not only seek to understand and to explain our past, but they also anticipate our future, both because they audaciously claim to be able to educate young people like you to take possession of that future, but also because they have a unique power and a responsibility to frame the ways in which we all think about what we, young, middle-aged, and old, want that future to be. You have chosen to join our college with the goal of advancing your intellectual and your personal self-development. Higher education in our context means both the acquisition of knowledge and training in the ways in which knowledge is acquired and used. And this dual task of intellectual empowerment and personal development, in a word, the task of liberal education, is not the only concern of our college, but it does claim our primary attention because it conveys our need to worry not only about the technical means of learning, but also about the social and cultural consequences of knowledge, because it says much about the multiple roles and robust tolerance to which all members of our community are called, and because, above all, it suggests the immense hopes and the aspirations with which, for better or worse, we have endowed our college and ourselves. And you will spend the next 4 years engaging in a challenging and stimulating educational program. This program encompasses a serious engagement with general education, what we call the core, and equally valuable opportunities to specialize in one or more advanced areas of knowledge and research. Although you will take many fascinating and I hope inspiring courses, perhaps the most vital component of this program will be your willingness to take substantial responsibility for your own educations. Many, many years ago, Professor Chauncey Boucher, who was the dean of the college in 1931 and who actually was the person who created the core curriculum, argued, quote, that each student must be given an opportunity to plunge as deeply as she or he may desire into any favorite subject from the beginning to the end of his college or her college residence, unquote. But Boucher also emphasized that a real education does not come from a mechanical piling up of credits, first in high school and then in college. Rather, an education can only be measured by the self-development of a student's intellectual resources and powers. And these words are simple but also formidable because Boucher was not talking about the university's resources and powers. He was talking about your resources and powers. He was talking about an education that expanded those resources. Such an education is a precious gift. It's a lifelong gift, and wondrously, it's a gift that you can only ultimately give to yourself. Now, to educate yourself at Chicago will take much zeal and enthusiasm, as well as patience and courage, but the payoffs are considerable. And our alumni repeatedly tell us, as we've already been told by one alumni leader today, that the educations they gave to themselves at Chicago transformed their lives, and we fully expect that you will have a similarly exceptional experience. Education in the college is thus not confined to a set of course requirements. Rather, your self-education will depend upon your willingness to appreciate new fields of knowledge and to use this appreciation to hone your ability to define terms accurately and clearly, to analyze problems into their significant elements, and to understand the general assumptions upon which your own and other people's arguments rest. And I think you will also learn, you will learn very quickly, I hope, that friendship, as the American political philosopher Hannah Arendt once argued, has a political relevance, not political in the transient sense of partisan politics, but political in the sense that the essence of friendship consists in discourse about issues that matter. So in welcoming you as young scholars, I also welcome you as mutually supporting and mutually respecting friends. And I'm confident that in getting to know each other and sharing your hopes and fears, your life experiences, your funny stories, and above all, your ideas with each other, you will come to constitute a community of friendship. This then is the goal of your college, to encourage that ambition for self-education that first interested you in coming here. We hope that you will use your gifts not only to enrich your own lives, but those of the lives of others in our society, for to make a complex civil society such as we inhabit today, a complex civil society facing so many social and political problems like contemporary America, to make a society peopled by individuals, by families, and by groups of different ethnic identities, religious orientations, different social and economic resources, and different cultural aspirations, to make that kind of a society work with the kind of decency and tolerance and a concern for those humane ties that should and do bind us together, that's a task that is a breathtaking ambition and requires wise and courageous citizenship. Now, I just alluded to the problems and to the uncertainties of the contemporary world. I was in Vienna, Austria this summer, and that city, located in the center of what was once a great empire, revealed quiet signs of the tremendous social displacements and ethnic conflicts that have plagued Europe in the aftermath of the unraveling of the Cold War. You will remember that this area of the European world was one of the first to confront the now much discussed phenomenon of multiculturalism, a much bandied about ideal on American college campuses. Vienna's empire, the Habsburg monarchy, was once the second largest land power in Europe, and it included 11 different peoples, among them Germans, Czechs, Slovaks, Hungarians, Poles, Romanians, Ukrainians, Italians, Croats, Serbs, and Bosnians, speaking 7 different languages and practicing at least 6 different religious faiths. You will remember that both of the world wars of the 20th century originated in this part of the world, in East Central Europe and in the Balkans. The First World War was launched in Vienna in July of 1914, and an Austrian draft dodger who spent his formative years as a young man in Vienna, Adolf Hitler, started the Second World War in September 1939. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the region was the site of bitter ethnic conflicts in Bosnia, and especially Sarajevo, epitomizing the excesses of ruthless nationalism and ethnic hatred that have so plagued our century. Most recently, the Balkans and East Central Europe have been one of the routes taken by refugees from the Middle East, from Africa, and from Central Asia, seeking security in Western and Central Europe, a process that has in turn caused enormous political controversy relating to immigration in many contemporary European societies, particularly in larger European cities like Vienna, Munich, and Berlin. Now, while I was in Vienna, I happened to be walking along the great boulevard. It's called the Ringstrasse. It's a beautiful boulevard that surrounds the old medieval city of Vienna. And in front of the neoclassical Parliament building, it's a very large neoclassical building devoted to the Parliament that sits proudly on the Ringstrasse. This building was designed in the 1860s by a Danish architect, Theophil Hansen, to look like an Athenian temple. So, an Athenian temple, in the hope, as Hansen put it, that, quote, noble classical forms would produce with irresistible force an edifying and idealizing effect on the representatives of the people, unquote. In front of this great neoclassical building, it was a small group of humbly dressed people begging for money from Austrian passersby. These people were clearly refugees, and I think they were likely refugees from Syria and from points farther east. And the scene was likely replicated elsewhere in the city that day, and it was certainly repeated elsewhere in many other European cities, Munich, Berlin, Hamburg, Budapest, Paris as well. But this particular scene intrigued me because of its sharp juxtaposition of images, some of which have deep references in European history. Now, in front of the Parliament, just beside the sidewalk and where these unfortunate people were gathering begging money, stands a huge gilded statue of Athena. And you will remember that Athena is the protectrix of ancient Athens. She's also the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of war and peace. And on the ramp leading up to the front of the door of the Parliament, directly in back of the statue of Athena, sit 8 huge statues of ancient historians, worthies such as Herodotus, Thucydides, Polybius, Tacitus, and Livy, welcoming but also reminding those modern politicians in the 19th century who entered the Parliament of the standards and achievements of the classical political tradition which they hoped to match, if not excel. Over a century ago, many brilliant politicians came together in this neoclassical Parliament, most of them trained at our sister research university, the University of Vienna, and at the Classical Gymnasium, the secondary schools that provided the university students. And they wrote a constitution, and they established a framework of laws to govern and regulate the interaction of the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe in the hope that liberal reason, could prevail, and that the wisdom of the ancients would find a happy replication in social and economic harmony 2 millennia later. They were particularly interested in reconciling the competing economic claims and political demands of these rival ethnic groups of the empire, making the demands that were being made both on the government and also against each other. And these politicians did so with all of the intellectual weapons at their command, not the least of which was their profound knowledge of ancient history and ancient law. They believed that law, fairly and equally applied and legitimated by the force of democratic rights, had the capacity to mediate social conflict and to engender economic opportunity. Hence their interest in affirming in stone the hoped-for connection between the ancients and the moderns. For these statesmen of a century ago, the study of the ancients, what some would ceremoniously or dismissively today call the great books, was a deadly serious business. Why else station Thucydides and Tacitus, Polybius and Sallust as moral sentinels on the steps of your parliament? Now, the juxtaposition that I observed on this brilliant July afternoon, early 20th century refugees from territories that once belonged to the Ottoman Empire, standing in front of the goddess Athena and the historians of her world, before a building designed by Austrian liberal politicians and a Danish architect to look like a Greek temple for the Habsburg Empire, whence law was supposed to flow and thus improve the conditions of the peoples of an empire that basically lived from immigration. That juxtaposition was surely a powerful challenge to any assumed trajectory of linear progress in Western civilization. For something clearly went wrong with the assumptions of those 19th century Constitution writers. Their law was to help reconcile and to integrate the peoples of the empire. Their law was to prevent the kind of ethnic violence and fears of different national traditions that occurred in 1914, that happened again in the 1990s, and that sadly are now reoccurring in our time as well. And yet liberal reason, informed by love of the ancients, proved sadly wanting. And the present refugee crisis in Europe and many other crises we now face around the world show that the helplessness of the 19th century also threatens to become our helplessness as well, in the face of intractable fears of ethnic and cultural difference, and particularly fears about the consequences of immigration. Now, I tell this story neither to justify nor to condemn the adaptive classicism of the 19th century, but because it may be of interest to you to know that many of the same authors that inspired these 19th century Constitution writers are also readings in our core course on the history of European civilization and in several other core courses at Chicago as well. Indeed, it's something of a local joke around here that one thing you can count on at the University of Chicago is that before graduating, you will read Homer in 5 different courses. Nowadays, the teaching of Western civilization, European civilization, is contested. Some see it as an attempt to impose the values of one culture, or in reality, set of cultures, on other peoples. Others see it as a kind of fascinating antiquarianism with little relevance to today's global societies. It is our policy at Chicago that students should select a year-long world civilization course as part of our core curriculum and studied in depth. And we do not require any single course of all students, and thus no one has to study European Civ at Chicago. Indeed, we value East Asian and South Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Islam absolutely on par with Europe as relevant and attractive areas of study, and we offer year-long courses in all of these areas. It is one of the luxuries of a great research university that we can do this, and we are very proud to be able to do it. I simply mention our European civilization course in the context of my Viennese street scene to remind you that the study of the great books has its own history, and that one cannot understand the history of the 19th century or the troubled consequences of the 19th century's decision for our century without understanding the world of antiquity that so inspired their time. The study of European civilization or any world civilization does not aim to provide students with morsels of Western or non-Western culture, nor to nourish their moral or aesthetic sensitivities, much less to attract the recruits to the history profession. But it does seek to raise a set of complex questions about the nature of time and change, about the intended and, more importantly, the unintended consequences of human action. And it also emphasizes how open-ended and contingent the processes of history are, how great the challenge, our challenge, your challenge, my challenge, is in seeking to confront our present, just as the men and the women trained in the 19th century research university tried to confront theirs. They had their classics, they had their great books, and they sought to use their critical capacities to master their times. You will have your classics, and equally important, you will have domains of knowledge unknown to the 19th century, and you too will be challenged to use that knowledge and your critical abilities to defend and to sustain and to improve our civil society. Will you and we do better than our 19th century predecessors? That's a big question, and I certainly hope so. Now, having gone from one particular, this university, to another, the European world, from which many of the institutional structures and traditions of all the great American research universities originated, let me return for a moment to our local context, the city of Chicago. In joining the University of Chicago, you have become a citizen of the city of the same name. Chicago is neither Athens nor Sparta, and it is hard to imagine a statue of Athena sitting in front of our seat of government. Yet surprisingly, we do have a very large and imposing statue in the center of our government district, the famous Picasso. If you are unfamiliar with Chicago's central city, you will surely want to venture downtown, perhaps sometime this week with some of your friends, and inspect this magnificent public sculpture on Daley Plaza. Now, I've always felt that Chicago's Picasso has a very distinct advantage over the Viennese statue of Athena, and that is that there is almost no agreement over what it is. I personally think that it represents the image of a woman, and that identity would certainly serve my argument very well in this talk. But others have just as seriously claimed, this is Picasso's statue, that it is a bird, a cow sticking out its tongue, a flying nun, a Viking ship, or Picasso's Afghan dog. When the statue was dedicated in the summer of 1967, just over 50 years ago, one irate Chicago newspaper reader argued that Picasso had fashioned the abominable snowman. Another insisted that it was part of a communist plan to destroy our culture and civilization. Not to be outdone, John J. Holan, who was a rather cranky but fascinating alderman at the time, he was the lone Republican in our city council, he offered a resolution ordering that the statue, which he called 5 stories of boilerplate, be deported to Paris and replaced with a statue of Ernie Banks of the Chicago Cubs. Of course, Mayor Richard J. Daley, the first and perhaps most famous Mayor Daley, ceremoniously ignored Alderman Holman, and the rest was history. Still, as a native son of the city, I can think of no more salient or apt characteristic of Chicago than that our city fathers would have had the boldness and the bravado to construct a huge, wonderful sculpture in the middle of the city, and then to encourage, indeed, to even celebrate the many divergent speculations about what this new symbol of our city actually stood for. I doubt that the good liberal burghers of 19th century Vienna or Berlin or Paris would have had the same brash self-confidence. My larger point is, of course, that this is a wonderful but often an astonishing city. Frank Lloyd Wright once exclaimed that Chicago is the national capital of what he called the American spirit, by which Wright meant that the city was new enough, big enough, brash enough, and vital enough to create a new culture worthy of a great new nation. Chicago is indeed a big city with a big history, like I think none other in the United States. And it's not simply that this is the city where in former times empty lots were said to vote, where the science of clout was perfected to infinite degrees, and where the job of alderman and ward committeeman is still far esteemed over that of a congressman. It's also a city of strength and energy and decisiveness, where what is compelling and valuable is not what you did yesterday, but what you'll do tomorrow. A city which is perhaps the most ethnically and culturally diverse of all the great American metropolitan areas, populated by rich and affluent people, by a large middle and lower middle class, and by many poor and even homeless people. Chicago is in many respects a microcosm of early 21st century America, just as it was a prime symbol of the recasting of American urban culture in the late 19th century. The historian William Cronin has aptly called Chicago nature's metropolis, referring to its protean expansion over the course of the last century, when the city's gargantuan growth made it quickly the capital not only of the Middle West, but also of the American West. And even today, to see the resplendent array of luminous skyscrapers in the central city at dusk along the shores of Lake Michigan is to know that Chicago's profound collaboration with nature has endured into our time as well. For those of you who are not native Chicagoans, I hope that you will come to know many of the fine people who make up this great city. And I hope that all of you will take time during your course of studies here to learn more about your new hometown, which after all is not only a metropolis, but also a polis. For a polis is, in Aristotle's sense, that to which one's nature leads one in fulfillment of and in perfection of one's natural self. That you are here today is surely more than a happy act of fate. Indeed, Aristotle would have thought this to be your natural destiny. Finally, a word of congratulations to the parents who have joined us today in the Harper Quadrangles. It is perhaps a truism that one of the highest hopes of parents everywhere is to be able to give their children a better education than they themselves had. Realistically, of course, none of us can give our children an education, only they can do this. But you have made it possible for your children to give themselves the best possible education, and for that, we congratulate you. The process of going to college is a complicated one for all parents. We do our best to advise our high school seniors about the selection of colleges, and then we live through many anxiety-filled months waiting for the famous thick envelopes that Jim Nondorf, I guess they're thick emails now, but they're thick, sends out to a select few. And then we live through the famous, at least in my experience, it was more infamous, summer before college, a summer that begins with prom night, is filled with wonderful anticipations, anxieties, and hopes, and that ends as the suitcases are packed, the front door is locked, and the car overloaded and on its way. You, our parents, have traveled a long distance to say goodbye to children whom you have known and nurtured and loved with great passion for almost 2 decades. On such an occasion, we are bound to be filled with enormous pride and yet with a melancholy about the passing of generations and of time itself. Time, at least for an historian, is a powerful thing. It's also an inescapable thing. It has its own reasons, its own logic, and it brings changes that often enrich and yet never fail to complicate our lives. You should be extremely pleased with the success of your daughters and your sons. That they're here today is their doing, for it was they who used their talents in ways that merited them the opportunity, indeed I would say the privilege, to become full and permanent members of one of the great universities of the world. Having entered Rockefeller Chapel just short of an hour ago, they are now students in the community that constitutes the University of Chicago. And over the coming 4 years, they will earn the privileges of joining that honorable company of educated women and men who are alumni, a most distinguished and passionately loyal group of citizens. They will certainly flourish in the college, and I have no doubt that 3 years from now, plus 9 months, we will see all of you back on the quadrangles, full of admiration for your sons and daughters' accomplishments, full of pride in their energy and their success, and having even greater love, if that's possible, for their compassion, for their generosity, and for their humanity. But they would not be here today without your help, without your encouragement, without your financial sacrifices, and above all, without your love. And so as the dorm rooms are put in order, and as the time comes to say goodbye, but of course only until family weekend in late October, I'm sure that I speak for all of our students as I speak for myself and my faculty colleagues in telling you that we are enormously grateful for your conviction that higher education does matter and that it is extremely valuable to the lives of our children and indeed to the life of our nation. Now it is our venerable custom that we must divide. After the motet choir sings the alma mater, I ask the first year and transfer students of the class of 2023 to proceed to your class photograph, after which you'll return to your residence halls and have a splendid dinner with your fellow class members. And it gives me a very special pleasure to invite the parents and other relatives and friends of the class of 2023 to join President Robert Zimmer and other members of college alumni, faculty, and administration for a reception in Harper Courtyard. Again, I welcome all of you to this magnificent community, a community of zealous intellectual comradeship and deeply supportive friendships, and most of all, of fearless learning. I wish all of you a safe and a stimulating year. Thank you very much.
Others Class of 2023, we ask that you remain seated until our administrators have processed out to the back of the chapel. We will then pull you out by residence hall. You will follow your gonfalon. We will dismiss you in a particular order, so we ask that you not move until you are cued to do so by your orientation leader in the yellow shirt. Okay?